Welcome to Gay Fairfax, the National Capital Area's only weekly gay entertainment magazine sharing news, views, and pride. I'm Dave Hughes.
And I'm Michelle Michaels. Each week we'll feature events and personalities of interest to gay men and women in Northern Virginia.
On this edition of Gay Fairfax, we'll meet Jim Long, an up-and-coming artist.
Then we'll be entertained by singer-songwriter Steve Langley, who was recently featured in the PBS special Tongues Untied. We've all heard the phrase, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. The same is true for art. We need only think about the contribution Robert Mapplethorpe made to the art world to know that what is art is also in the eye of the beholder. Jim Long, an artist from Richmond, is expanding the vision of art and beauty.
Hi, I'm Jordan Nye.
And I'm Walter Gomez, and we're here with Nye Gomez Gallery.
Tonight our guest is Jim Long, who's a photographer from Richmond, Virginia. Jim's work involves gender and sexuality. I first saw Jim's work last April at the Arlington Arts Center in Arlington, Virginia. And since that time, Jim has really risen quite rapidly. He's now represented by 6 galleries, including galleries in New York, Los Angeles, Paris, and London, and of course in Baltimore.
Why don't we begin by you telling us a little bit about your photographs, your artwork?
Well, I guess very simply, my work, my pictures are really pictures of moments of intimacy between two people. This series that I'm showing currently primarily focus on moments of physical expression between two people of the same sex.
How did you get started doing this type of work?
Well, I've been involved in the arts for really all of my life. I was trained as an architect and a designer, and I've taken pictures throughout, actually, through most of my life. About 4 or 5 years ago, I became interested in taking pictures, depictions of men that I wanted to see, but that I didn't see really anywhere in our culture. And about that time, I took a seminar by a feminist art historian named Eunice Lipton. And one of the things she talked about is the way women are presented in art in our culture, and how women, that the breadth of what women are is not presented. And so it made me think about how men are presented in art, in any kind of visual information in our culture.
So you think that men and women have been historically presented differently?
Yes, I think so. Women have generally and consistently really been presented as passive sex objects to be consumed by men. And men have primarily been depicted as heroes or villains or rapists or achievers, sometimes workers, hardly ever as fathers. They're presented as seducers, very rarely as lovers. Mm-hmm. So that became the area that I was really interested in seeing more of, personally as well as an artist.
Mm-hmm. In previous conversations that we've had, you've also made the relationship with the way Jesus Christ was represented. Can you talk a little bit about that, how it relates to your work?
When I started looking for depictions that I responded to, I mean, I thought back to my Catholic childhood, I guess, and I thought about those images that you see of Jesus, and I realized that they had left a certain imprint on me, and that those depictions I didn't see in other places, that there are pictures of Jesus and of saints, and in those pictures, very often the man is portrayed as despondent or injured or depressed or solemn or expressing love and tenderness and understanding, and to a really large extent, the images were limited to religious pictures.
Mm-hmm. In that same conversation, we were talking about the way that men have been portrayed in pornography and how it's a very tough image. And, and of course what you're doing is a complete role reversal here. It's a very feminine emotion that's being portrayed, but it's the same gender men that are being portrayed. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't call it one of the things I'm trying to challenge is what our culture defines as feminine and what our culture defines as masculine. And, I think it's very well established that certainly we have biological differences in terms of our body, but in terms of who we are in the world has to do with our culture and not to do with our biology. So what particularly Western culture has labeled masculine and labeled feminine is something that I'm trying to challenge. So that some of my pictures, I have taken religious pictures and, well, not directly, I have looked at the poses that the women have taken with men and interpreted them, those pictures, in a way so that the men then is depicted showing that emotion. Mm-hmm. So that then they take on a slightly different meaning, and they, I think, challenge the viewer to really question, and I think within themselves, that this is clearly two men by their bodies, but what these two men are doing is something that I, as the viewer, am not familiar with. In terms of pornography, whether it's what is called heterosexual pornography or whether it's what is called homosexual pornography, I think unfortunately it often falls into the same stereotypes as that so-called gay pornography falls into the same stereotypes as what's so-called heterosexual pornography, in that there's a dominant and a passive role, and instead of two people who are excited by being together. Mm-hmm. And that's, I guess, what I want part of what I want the pictures to be about.
Well, one thing that really struck me when I first saw your work at the Arlington Arts Center was, in fact, I mean, they were so compelling, I actually went back a second time and looked at them for another half an hour. Right. Was just the tenderness and the relationships between the people. And you're talking about pornography. I mean, this was very much something different. And I was wondering if you could maybe elaborate on, really what you're trying to portray, through these images.
Well, I need to go back, I guess, to respond to that. I need to go back and talk about what I wanted to see. And I wanted to see that those moments that you can have with a man that are kind of hidden in our culture. And that if you look at what happened with Mapplethorpe's work, I think that our culture, even though they offended a lot of people, our culture accepted them, because to a lot of people in our culture, that was what they believed that same-sex was about. And so that area that Robert Mapplethorpe wasn't so interested in is the area that I'm more interested in, and that is that area of a person touching another person in ways that are much more deep than skin touching skin. Mm-hmm. But also including that, because I think we have as a culture a real part of our shadow and part of our shame is our desire. And that our desire and our animal nature is something that we have to hide and be embarrassed about. Mm-hmm. And that actually I don't think you see in a lot of religious pictures.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that the comparison with Robert Mapplethorpe also is interesting. A couple of the reviews that I've seen of your work in the last few months, they actually did compare your work to Mapplethorpe. Right. And I personally really don't see that much of a comparison, to tell you the truth. I think that Mapplethorpe's work was much more, it's more hard edge, kind of hit you over the head type of thing. He does have some beautiful, images. Actually, I find his flower images much more erotic than some of his people images. But what do you think about the comparisons that people have made of your work to Mapplethorpe's?
Well, I'll say something that my mother has actually said. When my mother has read the reviews of my work, she's very impressed that my work is referred to in the same paragraph as Mapplethorpe's, which I think is kind of interesting. And I asked her one day on the phone, I said, "Mom, have you seen Robert Mapplethorpe's work?" And she said, "No, but I know he's famous." So I have a lot of respect for Robert Mapplethorpe in that he, of course I don't like all of his pictures, you know, and I don't think that, you know, why should I have to like all of his pictures, but yet I have a lot of respect for what he did. And he had something he wanted to say, and I think that he was good at what he wanted to say. But I think his pictures have a certain kind of polished quality, a certain kind of focus on the body as an object that is not where my primary interest lies. So I find it curious when they link us together, and I think they link us together because most people can't think of anybody else, certainly in the arts, who depicted men so much, and certainly men together. You know, so because there aren't very many of those pictures. And so I think that that's what happens. It's more that we're part of, that it's almost like that we use the same color of paint, but I think we're doing very different things with the paint.
So what you're in essence saying is your photographs are more about emotions and feelings and relationships and whatnot. Yeah. So what goes along very well with that is the proportions that you use. Your images are 2 inches by 3 inches, and they're placed on very specifically on an 8 by 10 paper. Can you talk about the reason for that and how it works?
Right. Let me correct you a little bit. The images are 2 inches by 3 inches. The paper is 11 by 14. Okay. So there's a large area of white around the image that I really consider to be part of the image. And there probably are 50 or 60 reasons that I did that, of which I won't go through right now.
Just mention a couple.
I'll mention the more interesting ones. Number one, that there was a quality of preciousness I wanted about the pictures, and I use the word precious purposely because that's a word in our culture that somehow is it's considered kind of silly or unmacho, that something is precious, or that something is small. And so in some ways it was a deliberate affront to a kind of macho attitude, particularly in art, that the bigger it is, the better it is. And it's not just in art, it's really, I think, all over our culture. And you can go into art galleries all over the world now and see enormous photographs as big as a wall, but there's nothing going on in the photograph. It's just big, and everybody's standing around and looking at this great big photograph. So in some ways part of it was that. And one of the things that Eunice Lipton had talked about in this seminar about women in art, women's presentation in art, she talked about how the size of images had played a large role in which artists became successful, and that characteristically in the past some women have worked small, where men have tended to work larger. And so there became then this association that important artwork was big. Okay, so there's that stuff. Then there's the part of it that has to do with separating the picture, the image, from the surround, that I think has more to do with looking at the picture. That if I surround the image with all that white space, then number one, it forces, well, it doesn't force, but it kind of encourages the person to step closer. Mm-hmm. So in a way, they become part of what's going on there by being so close to the artwork. I think the bottom line is that it was intuitive, that these pictures needed to be small. Not all of my pictures need to be small, and I've already made some that are much bigger. But they're different images. Mm-hmm. The quality and what's being said and the story that's being told are much different.
I think what's interesting in our gallery when people come in to look at your images, you know, obviously they're appealing to gay men, but we also have sold some to lesbians, and I think that they find them very intriguing. And then we even had a couple, I guess, that came in the last couple of weeks, that a straight couple, that were very interested in them, which kind of, at first really kind of surprised us, but then I guess, we kind of thought about it and thought, there's really a lot going on here, a lot of different levels. And
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that if they can blur the distinctions of sexuality, that's great. If those distinctions get blurred, well, I'll use the example that when I showed the work in Los Angeles, and the person who was looking at them at the gallery out there, I was talking to her that different people responded to them, and she said to me, she says, I can see that women would respond to these because these pictures present a view of men that women want to see more of. So, and I really feel happy when I hear that people can look and see that this is a story about two people, that the people happen to be two men, or in some of the pictures the people happen to be two women, or in some of the pictures it's two women and two men, but that in the end that they are really about us as people and wanting to be touched as people.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for being with us today, Jim.
I've enjoyed it.
Join us. The Fairfax Lesbian and Gay Citizens Association offers a sense of camaraderie and spirit among gay people. FLGCA holds numerous social and community events and sponsors political and educational projects. So don't put it off any longer. Join FLGCA today.
For your free copy of the latest FLGCA newsletter, write to Gay Fairfax, care of FLGCA, Post Office Box 2322, Springfield, Virginia, 22152, or give us a call at 703-451-9528.
The PBS Point of View program recently aired a controversial episode called Tongues Untied, which spotlighted the gay black male and featured the music of singer-songwriter Steve Langley. Gay Fairfax reporter Rick Sincere caught up with the Washington, D.C. native. They talk about his music and its reflection on the gay experience.
He said he was the best lover that he ever had. He said he was the best lover that he ever had. It wasn't easy to understand. He couldn't leave her for another man. No, so he kept on waiting and waiting and waiting for his chance. Said he was going to the mountains to clear his head. She waved him goodbye and with a smile said, honey, get some rest. They've been through so much through the years. What about the future? What about the kids? Oh, so he kept on talking and talking and talking through his fears. You're the one who went down the aisle. You're the one who said I do. You're the one who stood and took the vow. Look what's happening now. He swore this thing would never, ever get out of hand. No, no. He swore this thing would never, ever, ever get out of hand. It wasn't easy to understand. Now he couldn't leave her for another man. Oh, so he kept on waiting and waiting He wore a wedding band, yes. He didn't understand, nah, how he could fall in love, no, with another man.
Steve, you're a native of Washington, D.C. Can you tell us something about how growing up in D.C. influenced your choice of a career and helped you get your creative juices going?
Growing up in Washington, which is a very political city, I can't help but be a political artist. Much of the material that I write, people tell me has some sort of a political edge or has some sort of message. And that's the only way I know how to write, given the fact that I grew up in, or have grown up in, what is considered the political capital of the world.
I see. Now, recently you appeared in the very controversial documentary on PBS, Tongues Untied. Tell us something about the reaction to that film and how you felt about appearing in it and what people had to say about it.
Well, first of all, I feel honored to have been a part of the production. The response that I've gotten has been very positive. The film is controversial, but it needs to be, because the statement that it makes is that we're proud of who we are, being black and gay, and that there will be no apology, that we do make contributions, that we do have credible, viable lives.
And the reaction in the black gay community to the film, has it generally been positive? Has there been any criticism that you've heard?
It's been very positive. It is very rare for black gay men to see themselves portrayed positively on screen. We've certainly had a wealth of negative portrayals of us being weak, of being not productive, and Tongues Untied has been different. It has shown us having feelings. It has shown us caring about ourselves and about our families, about this country, and about the world that we live in. And many of my friends and people that I've met have been very honored and been very proud to see it, and have felt better about themselves. And I think that's the best thing about Tongues Untied.
Tongues Untied, the acclaimed new film by Emmy Award winner Marlon Riggs.
Abomination! It's an abomination!
Anger unvented becomes pain, unspoken becomes rage, released becomes violence, cha-cha-cha.
I was blind to my brother's beauty, and now I see my own.
Anger unvented becomes pain, unspoken becomes rage, released becomes violence, cha-cha-cha.
You can do what you want to do. You can do what you want to do.
Brother to brother, 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 brother to brother.
Listen to me. Parallel lines, they sometimes do cross. You understand what I'm saying? Try to explain it, and you're at a loss. Our souls are searching, the path is clear. What are the forces that brought us here? Oh, it must have been fate. 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 The pendulum swings chance. But we may never know. No, 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 no. There's so much frustration. There's so much doubt. It's funny how problems, they somehow work out. Ooh, oh, it must have been fate. 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 Your crystal ball won't tell it all. No, 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 no. Nor will your palm. Your master plan has failed again. See, everything is not in your hands. It must have been fate. 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 It must have been fate, 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 fate. Some things were meant to happen that way. Some lives were meant to cross the day. Some things were meant to happen that way, yeah. Some lives were meant to cross one day.